Yeah, thanks Hayden. Thanks Tim for your brilliant words. Thanks to the NVA for inviting me and giving me the chance to see St. Peter's finally. I remember the first time we met was in Venice. Another invitation I really love to do it, discussing about something I've never seen just because I have a certain experience on dealing with such issues. And so I was more than happy to come here and see this magnificent landscape, because it is a landscape. We as landscape architects might bring in that idea of interpreting such buildings, such elements, such things as landscape. What is a relatively young movement? I mean, you should know that mountains haven't been considered as being a landscape for very long until they were detected as such in 19th century and so on. And so we did also with the industrial estates and elements, but also other areas where we have distinctive leftovers. I use the term ruin, but leftovers is much more precise because it is just a given moment in time. We have the chance to perceive something and deal with something. A ruin is something definite. Then you cannot do anything anymore, we could argue. In that sense, also, I wanted to pick on a word. You were saying that within that huge park, there is at the center this industrial thing. And we say, no, it's not at the center. The whole thing is the industry, because the industry doesn't exist of a building where there is inside a machine. The industry is everything, and without that, we don't understand it. It's the infrastructure around it. It's the use and movement of materials. And if we don't see that, we cannot understand the little bits and pieces which might be spectacular, but rest isolated in time. And so also in St. Peter's, we have that thing that this building is not just the monster up there where we should do something with or integrate or whatever. It is a part of a large a thing which is complex and which has so much to offer, and it is much more than only the story of Catholicism, I would say, in Scotland, of a very specific part of their history. It is much more than that. And so we can happy, and I only place this picture because it's something which is always puzzling us, is what we're having here and what we're talking about today is a landscape of complexity, of sense, and it is not something emptied. Basically, landscape is a product of intellectual thinking, and when something, well, I don't need to tell you that in large detail, but I put now a few persons who have dramatically changed the perception of a landscape and have used something which we consider today as a ruin or as a reminder in the true sense of the word, because the ruins are reminders of something, and they are potentially products of the future, like you see on the lower right corner. Another one which you know very well, I don't need to mention that guy specifically, Mr. Turner, William, who was one of the first ones really drafting these structures and giving them sense other than only saying this is a ruin, because they became a kind of picturesque or pastoral or incredibly important part of landscape. There were much more ruins in former times than today, because people didn't have the money to take them down. So you were basically going through a landscape where you saw that kind of stuff permanently, informing your mind and making your life possibly sometimes more interesting. The next two persons, specifically Robert Macpherson, was, as the name says it already, a Scotsman, and that also again dramatically changed the perception of ruins. He was going to Rome for health reasons, but I think he really wanted to be a painter, an artist. He failed and found that it's much more lucrative or much more interesting to become a photographer, and he earned a hell of a lot of money by photographing Rome, which was only consisting of ruins. Rome, as we know it today, was a collection of pristine ruins. And they only stayed because it was too expensive to take them down. It was massive works. But it was ruins. What we see today, all this kind of stuff is reconstructed. It is re-put into state. But it was that stuff which inspired the Northern European people to imagine a former world, to open up a vision of what has been 2,000 years before, or sometimes even longer before, which never really existed. We know by science today that the world they constructed out of that did never exist. And that's what I found is so fantastic about ruins. We're not talking about what has really happened. It's something which steers our mind, which fosters imagination and makes people, and especially kids, they are much more clever than we are, to create a world they live in, they play with, and this creates new stuff. This is unfortunately a bit over drafted, but this is just leftovers in a completely emptied landscape, and I showed it because the first picture I showed was also emptied agricultural landscape. There was nothing in it, a few trees, agricultural wasteland, we could also say. Yeah. It's highly contaminated sometimes, and this is the Campagna, and there was the leftovers of the Aqua Claudia, a viaduct, an aqueduct of big importance, and that made it suddenly strong and interesting, although it's broken for 2,000 years. The most influential stuff were these columns always. Today, most of that is reconstructed, and they influenced an architectural movement which is one of the strongest Europe ever had, because it influences even modern architects, postmodern architects, etc. So, creating memory. It was creating memory. It was not showing memory. It's fantastic, and we love that stuff, although we have no idea what's behind that temple. And we imagine, oh, Roman people running around. Wow. Other people did that as well, but in a very different way, and I was asked by the NBA to write a little essay, and I played it down because I'm not a philosopher, I'm not an historian, but I have a very simple approach for myself to these kind of things. And when we see ruins and this kind of memory which is evolving and we're playing, you know, just seeing somewhere an old castle, etc. This guy, Vicino Orsini, was the first one who played with it in Renaissance Italy, because before that everything is manicured, talking about the past, etc., the basis of culture. And what he did, he was only creating monsters and ruins, etc. And it's really interesting. The Parco dei Mostri in Bomarzo, in the center of Italy, was, when I was there for the first time, a wilderness. Today it's cleaned up completely, and you only see the statues. At that time, you could see only one statue in a jungle. And it was surprising. You went through the Parco dei Mostri, as they say, but the ruin was one of the first constructed ruins at all, because it was tilted. It was the fear of the people at that time from Erdbeben, how do you say, when the ground is shaking? Earthquakes, thank you. And he was literally mocking on that, because you could go through and have a fun experience. So he was bringing things together you never thought. So even more, he didn't have a one-dimensional thinking about ruins. He said, there's plenty of things. It could be even beautiful. Wow, well, next one. What for me was important on this is to think about the ruin as a storyteller, but also something you can use. It's extremely important that you're able to use, to touch, to feel, to smell. You said it absolutely right, a ruin. Because we're men, we're not just brain, we have a body, we have to feel things, we have to touch it, and so on and so on. And there's one area in Germany, and that's the project I'm going to show you today, where some of our thinking went through. The Ruhr area, it's full of industry and still is until today. Today it's one of the greenest regions in the world, I would say, with industry. But it was not. It's quite big, like 60 million people living there, and it was looking like there on the left. The air was permanently like this. There's some regions here which had exactly the same experience, in England especially. And there's still industry working today, but it's pretty clean, I must say. Not fully, but next one. And that's how things looked. And I want to say something about ruin and heritage. I mean, that's how it was looking around I think that was more or less in the 50s. And that's a state. Industry is something which is not fixed. You're not constructing it, and then you use it, and when it's not used anymore, you abandon it. Wrong. Industry is something which permanently changes, is permanently adapted. Heritage is a fun job, really, I must say, because, although I highly respect it, because even if you want to protect something industrial, which state do you protect? It has already been built over several times. The origin doesn't exist anymore, and what you have is a horrible mess. There are even no plans existing anymore because they didn't care. It's fantastic, and it doesn't look like that anymore. Next one. It was rather like this, really abandoned, gray, rusty, etc., contaminated, highly contaminated. We didn't decontaminate because it would have cost so much. We could have built a park 6 to 7 times, and so on, except 2 or 3 places. And we tried to understand the landscape. And I come back to St. Pete. It's fantastic because you try to read the landscape. You try to see it first, to take the time, notion of time, to really understand it and do something with it before you push the typical landscape and architecture cliches on top of that, throwing them out. And we learned that industrial landscapes, but also all landscapes, are multi-layered. You have different layers of experience. The lowest one is usually the water, although it runs top down, you know. The highest one is lookout points, etc. And there's many fields and everything, and that's the stunning thing about industry that makes it so great, is connected by infrastructure. It's not the big building there or there, it's the infrastructure, and that reconnected back into the city. So we just need to reuse these systems, and the park's already there. You could say it's boring, it's ugly, it's whatever. Well, we tried to make it interesting. Next one. That was the park later. The plan's a bit over, it's a bit blown up, but that was the idea. We could say very conservative. We said we need to get these things. We need to take the Taurus by the horn. We need to be able to go up, walk up, have that lookout point, touch the steel, and lose the fear from the monster. And what we did is keep it all. That's why we won the competition, I guess. We tried to filter in forms of landscape transformation of the site which softened the appearance, but which transformed also the perception of the steel system, the regular system, into something nice and green. Next one. And so it did look very early. Today the trees are much bigger. They filter the appearance and make them acceptable and create space. And vegetation is very important, and that was something we've seen also uphill today. It is that it over-dramatizes a site, and it's very unique, it's very specific. Industry is even more specific because you have like 20 different types of soil because of the contamination, because of ore, concrete, this and that, but also agricultural surfaces, and you can deal with that and make the landscape more interesting. Next one, so we played with it. There are wonderful flowers you don't see in any botanical garden, but which are equally beautiful, I think. Sometimes more beautiful than roses, and low maintenance. That was a reason how to get the local politics on board and the administration. And that resulted also in new plants, because these places are completely artificial. There is no discussion about native plants here. It would be ridiculous. Like very often in a city, talking about native plants is, for me, a very strange thing to do, because a city is not a natural habitat, except for men. And so we added plants which come from all around the world, which grow well. Some are also from Europe. Next one. The things are overgrown. That's a typical thing. That's what we love. You know, things are overgrown, soften. Next one. But we detect also landforms. The engineers were the biggest land artists in the world. You know, I mean, this is great. Look at that structure. It's like a harp plus, etc. Wow. We just need to cut the trees. I'm sorry, we have to cut trees sometimes to make something appear. We have to cut vegetation. We have to be harsh. Also to allow for other plants to survive besides that, but good gardeners know that. And we were cutting here. That was just at the beginning. I'm not showing much more. And we were drawing then the plans of that. We didn't have the plans first. We were drawing the plans after we were detecting it, because there was no plan. And these were the landforms we were then trying to work out. That made the landscape interesting and led to huge structures. I mean, for people to make it interesting, they needed to be green. That's the green in front of it, so there are the concepts. Next one. But what to do with something like this? The huge bunkers. They are 40 meters long, 8 meters high, 8 meters wide, sometimes closed. What can we do with that? We had many concepts. The art concept is introduced at the moment in the frame of the Emscher Kunst, so the Emscher art. We try to introduce other systems like playgrounds. So not the usual playground, just use it. It's also the BMX European Championship, which happens there regularly. And old people slide down the tube. They love it, and they walk up again. I had a historian from London who did it twice. And then we were designing architecture in the spirit of the former constructions in order to have an integrated work that both becomes park, that both becomes a common thing. And that's what was easy here and what is difficult in St. Peter's, because you have already 3 different languages. Modernist, 19th century, plus the old and medieval leftovers, and a stunning topography. This is all man-made here. And via this, the old structures become park, the new structures are park. You just have to detect where you're allowed to go. Next one. Cutting holes into the concrete to open up for gardens. Putting sometimes very nice gardens. That's something I encourage always, that if you have a huge site, you have a big site because there's not much money, you create biotopes, or we say little paradises or little oases within that. This is a very, I think, strong narrative, sometimes criticized, but you can do also classics landscapes into that. That's absolutely fine. This creates, within the contrast, this creates interest. And especially interest for other people, so structures could be used also for kids. It's the most famous place for them in that area. Or for the water system, because it's all connected. It's great. Industry is great. Everything is connected, very strongly built. So you can put in electricity, but also pipes. Next one. Could be used, like the gasometer for divers. And they're still in there. It's a diving school. Next one. And reusing the old landforms is sometimes more interesting than creating a kind of, but that is a very specific position, a pseudo-natural thing. Because nature, you have it, but this you only have one time. And it really works. And the whole thing is powered economically with wind, so we're reusing the old structures to install the biggest of that kind. But this is one thing, it became a symbol for the change, but also to move the water. Water systems are very important. Next one. Water is a clue anyway, if you deal with a site, because you need to water plants, you need to clean it, etc. So it's something which is even functional. Finally, what to do with places, how to reinterpret them. So here we did next one with some old plates, so huge plates, which are several tons heavy. We created a new square, which was rather considered as being an art piece. My father protests always, I'm not an artist. I'm a landscape architect. I said, Peter, who cares who you are? You have to have good ideas and realize them. And whether you're an artist, an architect, a politician, or whatever, I don't care. And next one. So it becomes something like this, a stage for people. Although you could be heavily harmed for health and safety, this would be closed immediately. But fortunately, we are in the Ruhr. People are very open over there for dangerous things. I exaggerate. Next one. Parties as well happening there. Next one. And if it's empty and just few people climbing around the structures, could be also this. I come to almost the last point, is what to do with the big halls. Always the big question, because the big halls were meant to just frame the machinery. Once the machinery is out, next one, wow! But now it's empty. So what to do with these huge halls? And we had several of these. Not the client, but the communities around asked specialists to make a survey and analysis, economic framework, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, we have no idea. It's too expensive to change them to multifunctional halls. Goodness. And what did we say together with our client, the IBA? We said, wait, come on. You can still take them down in 3 or 5 years or 10 years, but please let them be there. We'll find an idea. And sometimes it's very easy. Next one, that's what happened there later on. We just have, you hardly see that here on this picture, we just have little fans in there heating up the air. And so it's quickly heated and can be used for anything. And that's all you need. You keep the fabric as it is. Why, like adapting it to a fully multifunctional hall? Next one. So politicians go there, but also fashion shows, presentation of new cars, etc. And it's just heated up for one evening, one day, and then it's cold again for a week, 2, 3, and you save a lot of money. Why making perfect multifunctional halls? How boring. Next one. What too happens also in other places, this is where the melted steel came out of the blast furnaces. It's this perfect stage, fantastic. Next one, you see it even better for classic music. Just the cover is fine, you know, in summer it's warm enough. Next one. But what to do with these, you know? Okay, you can climb up, but at nighttime it's quite oppressive, etc. And there was something my father hated, I loved it. Today he is fine with it. Our client had the idea to bring in an artist, British artist. And in that sense, it was Jonathan Park, next one, usually working for Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, etc. And he was following the rhythm of the material. And it basically starts somewhere, it becomes more and more light, different light colors, and then it goes down to almost no light again until midnight, and then the park is dark. 230 hectares, open park, dark. No crime, no vandalism anymore, perfect, people love it. Because this, and that's my theory, reminds people of commercial activities in TV, etc. So all that usual part of society which is aggressive and does most of the graffiti stopped because they suddenly thought, hey, that's a cool place, that's great, we'd rather go skating. And so this goes up and up and up and up, and the latest at around 12 it goes down and comes with something like this, not pushing anymore, that's the last one. I just wanted to leave this one. Because it shows that you have to have also a multi-layered thing. It's not only about social offers, but to accept the individual perception of a site by the different groups of society, if you want to have a really sustainable project. And yeah, this goes a bit too far for St. Peter's maybe, but what I wanted to do is just bring our approach with this very specific site as a kind of inspiration. And to tell you also that sometimes you don't have to do much. I mean, this was a very cheap park, didn't cost a lot. It needs 4.5 million euros a year, 3 million for the buildings to save them, and 1.5 for the park. This is nothing for 230 hectares of industrial fabric. And 1.5 million is played in by these buildings because they are rented out to big groups. And I just wanted to tell you that something like this, even on a small scale, is also possible for St. Peter's. This is a stunning feature which could be not only a background for big parties, but really its place. Sorry, Hayden, I finished.